starting more on a slower pace and kind of getting some things out and getting organized for the year. So that's good. Okay, the next topic was really around how do we want to organize the task force for 2021. So if you recall, last year we sort of broke out into three subcommittees, the Minnesota model, the barriers in technology, and then the digital inclusion. And I know we had longer names for each one, but those were the three groups, and we're all assigned to those different groups and tackle different topics. And again, the goal for the subcommittees was to have discussions about, specific topics that were relevant in that area, and then potentially recommend meetings that we would have, or presenters or topics we should discuss at the larger meeting, bring those up. And then at the same time, when we were putting the report together at the end of the year, different recommendations came from the different subcommittees, and then we discussed them as a whole. And then as you saw the document, it started out broken out in the various three subcommittees, and then organized around more the topics and the recommendations. So hopefully that format worked for everyone. If not, I'm happy to take more feedback on that and something we should do differently. But before we get into that, the first thing I wanted to check was, did the structure of subcommittees make sense, or do folks want to get away from this idea of having subcommittees? And obviously, if you have comments or questions, you can, or concerns, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Teddy, I think the subcommittee, I think the process worked very well, certainly from a sheer organizational perspective with new members. I think there might be a time to maybe change topics, if you will. We were under the Minnesota model. I mean, me personally, I'd really like to kind of put a subcommittee under the guise of, what do we need to do, whether we call it the unserved subcommittee or, something like that with, the infusion of RDOF dollars, grant dollars, what does that narrative of unserved look like, and how do we get that to zero? I think that, that would be something I'd be interested in.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is keep the concept or structure of a subcommittee, but let's change the topic of focus for the subcommittees, and specifically with one being around this unserved concept. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Brian?
I think that's an excellent idea that Paul provided there. I think that really gets to the heart of what we're trying to do. So great comment, Paul. You'd be a good chairman for that committee.
Since my company will never be a grant applicant, I think and we're not eligible, I think that'd be perfect.
Brian, you're not helping for folks to speak up and make suggestions,
Very diplomatically, he diplomatically maneuvered me there.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay, so I like that concept. So the whole unserved, like how do we tackle that, and how do we reach it? Like, what's the potential? Like, what are the work that we need to do to reach the goals? Whether it's the 2022, 2026, what do we need to do there? Okay, that sounds like a good one. Okay, so is there anybody opposed to start here? Is anybody opposed with the concept of using subcommittees? Bernadine?
I agree with Paul and Brian. I think the subcommittees work great as a construct. I also agree with the idea of rejiggling them a little bit, and I like the idea of focusing on the unserved. I would throw out there as a potential focus for another subcommittee the speed goal question, which we've identified as a focus for this year. We might want to have a subcommittee looking at this speed goal thing.
Okay, that's good. Teresa?
I like subcommittees too. I think that we should maybe change up the topics. I love unserved. I think that's what we're really focusing on, and that's our main goal as this group. I also think that we should probably come together sooner when we're writing the report. Hopefully we're past this pandemic and we can actually meet as a group and go through the report as one instead of three separate, maybe draft them, but just come together sooner than, December became, I think, stressful for everybody trying to do so many things at the end of the year. And I know the writers, it must have been a burden. So just
yeah. No, I agree with you, Teresa. It's how the virtual setting, right, doesn't quite help, and then it sort of culminated at the end. But the good news is, I think to what Diane said, we keep the format of the document to a certain extent, and then and even the topics, we keep them the same, right? Like different sections of the document, keep them sort of the same, and then that way we can then plug into that document and change things out, which will make it much easier to review as a group, as a whole, earlier in the year.
I have another comment. I know in 2018 they had a really good writer. I don't know who that writer was, but is there an option that we hire one person as a writer? Is there money for that instead of having three different writers try to write one report and bring it together at the end? Is there a possibility of going that route?
I don't know about the dollars question. Diane, is that, I don't know if that's in any budget, right? Or is there a budget for that?
There isn't a specified budget. I know we can use 3% of the grant funds to administer the grant program and for mapping, but there isn't anything specifically called out. We have in the past, for example, paid for lunches for the task force and mileage reimbursement for those that need it and can't get it from their employer. But those have been fairly small items, but we can look into it.
Okay.
I think it'd be worth looking into. I don't know if Deed has internships or, somebody, a student from the Humphrey School, somebody assigned to the task force. John Dukic wrote the report, at least was kind of the primary author, at least getting it in a workable format for the task force to shape. He was with the Minnesota High Tech Association at that point. So I agree. I think that kind of having one author makes a little bit more of a consistent flow between the task force and can give the overall document kind of a consistency. And we've got some talented folks out there perhaps we could draw on, whether it's an intern or somebody like that.
Thank you. That was my thought too. Thank you.
Okay. We'll look into this concept of a dedicated writer. I like that idea. It's either finding funding somewhere to make that happen, whether it's through internship or something like that, or it's finding a volunteer, right? That's willing to do this. And the thing is that person, has to sort of work with everyone on the task force and the various committees that meet together and all that. So, but let's look into it. Something to tackle now versus later. It'll make it a bit easier to identify a path there. Yvonne?
A possible resource for a writer, Lead for America, Benya Krause. She does fellowships, paid fellowships for the graduate level students or young people who want to work in rural Minnesota. And she has some funding for those fellowships. This seemed like a project that she would love. I'll give you her contact information.
I know Benya. I took her to lunch a couple months ago. She's actually from Washington.
Yeah.
I could reach out to her too.
Yeah, Benya would be a great resource, I think, to help us find someone that's high quality. Really great.
She's phenomenal. That's a very good idea. Thank you.
And she's encouraging young people to live in rural Minnesota and find, exciting work like this.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay. Great suggestion. Thanks, Yvonne. Okay, so I'm not hearing anything against the subcommittees. Two ideas that I have out right now, at least two topics that were laid out. The concept of unserved, as Paul outlined. Bernadine also suggested speed goals. Other things, Yvonne?
Another possibility might be a subcommittee around the idea of accessibility and affordability. So sort of the underserved, as another group.
Okay. Accessibility and affordability. That makes sense. There is the concept of, and the topic of mapping that was brought up earlier. Do we want to put that? I think 3 subcommittees is probably a good number versus having a 4th one. Maybe we'll work that in with either the unserved or the speed goals. I don't know which one makes the most sense. We'll have to give it some thought. Would that make sense for folks? Steve Georgie?
I was going to speak on something else, but I concur. I know the FCC, I believe, was appropriated some funds just before whatever his title was, President I, or Commissioner, whatever, left office. They were supposed to start that project at the federal level, but I was going to raise the question of, does the task force think it is appropriate that we look at the challenges of our educational institutions in Minnesota that have suffered greatly because regardless of the situation with COVID, virtual learning, online learning, distance learning is not going away. It's going to become a staple Minnesota public education. And there are a lot of districts that are challenged because of rural locations and not having connections. I'm just curious if that's something the task force thinks is worthy.
No, I think that's a great suggestion, Steve. The accessibility and affordability could look at that as well, but it could be its own as well. I think that's a good idea. And one thing you reminded me of is I think it's called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund or something like that. That's the mapping piece. Digital collection something. I forget. I can't remember the name, but that was one of the topics that we were going to bring as a task force, and FCC had committed to come and talk to us, and then they sort of dropped or disappeared for a little bit with Chairman Pai leaving. But that could be another topic of going and knocking on their door and see if they can come talk to us about where they are, right?
The Broadband Data Improvement Act, isn't it? That they got funding for in the stimulus bill.
The Broadband Data Act was what they needed, and then there's a program. It's so messy. I can't really understand that. There's another program before that was supposed to kind of redo the whole mapping using geospatial technology and all that. So the Broadband Data Act is going to morph into this other thing, from what I understand, and then and there's funding for that now based on the stimulus bill. But having them come in and kind of educate us a little bit about all that, what might be changing, and how they're going to do the mapping, I think that would be an excellent topic as well. And yeah, the educational challenges, Steve, I think it's a good one. We need to hear that. I'm sure Mark would have a passion around that. So not saying he should be the chair, but I know he will be very, very happy to take that on. And maybe around this idea of accessibility and affordability, and with a specific focus on education. So I think that's a great suggestion. Okay. Any other suggestions? So while you're thinking or raising your hand, a couple of things that I have. So we want to keep the structure of a subcommittee, 3, maybe 4, as far as kind of how many we have. The larger topics for each of the subcommittee, this concept of unserved, where are we there? Maybe even tackling some of the underserved piece. One around speed goals, what should that be in the future, and tackling that, and maybe the whole idea of symmetrical and all that falls under that. The mapping piece, how should that change? That may fall in the first one in unserved or speed goals. We can further define where that is. And then this concept of accessibility and affordability, even with a kind of a specific narrowing down a little bit. I mean, talk broader, but also maybe dig deeper into the educational challenges and what, with kind of this new virtual learning that's been introduced in 2020. What are the schools seeing, and what are some of the challenges different families are facing? I think that'd be a good topic. So those are kind of like around the topic ideas. We want to review the document earlier in the year, at least have it ready earlier in the year so we can review it together as a group and have more time for it versus trying to cram it in at the end of the year. And we'll see if we can get one dedicated writer that can help us, shape the document. And we do have a couple of suggestions for how we may go find an individual to be able to do that, so we can pursue that. That is a little bit of the summary of what I heard from the group here. Any other suggestions or things I may have misstated? Okay. I don't have a specific, right now it would get really messy to try to figure out who is going to belong in which subcommittee. So what I'll do is once we put the meeting minutes together, we'll do it a little bit sooner than we have in the past, kind of summarize it and maybe have it broken out. And then maybe you can do your preference 1, preference 2 for each of the subcommittees for the different task force members. And then based on sort of the numbers and how that breaks out, we can assign different folks to it. I think that's sort of how we did it last time, and seemed to work out. And I know we made some adjustments at the end, and then even with the new members, which is fine. But that seems to be a sensible way to do it. That said, as you know, it's more having the discussions in the subgroups. Most of the recommendations and the larger discussions will happen with the overall task force. So we want to make sure we have that discussion as a whole, not necessarily just in the subcommittee. I think that it's kind of what we aspired to last year, although we got kind of at the 10th hour there, we were supposed to putting the document together. We pushed a little bit harder. But that's a learning for this year that we'll try to avoid, and hopefully it'll be reversed this year where we get to meet for the latter half of the year versus the other way around, and then we'll have a chance to really discuss this in more detail. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this specific agenda item? Okay, so we'll work on sort of summarizing what we just talked about, and then sending it out for the group, and then letting you sort of do a maybe make additional suggestions if something was not captured correctly, and then also give you an opportunity to let us know what the preference is of which subcommittee you want to be on, and then on the next task force meetings we'll sort of finalize that, and then go from there and kind of follow the same sort of structure and process that we did this past year with some of the tweaks that we just talked about here. Okay, and then the last agenda item we have is any other public comments, any other business. So for that, is there any other sort of...
We did have a few in there, and so just the 2 that we went up by Hermantown in the Arrowhead region and the one in Minnetrista. So thank you to the people involved in that process. I think Gardenville, didn't they win big?
Yeah, we won big.
Really big.
We couldn't be more excited here. I got a big pen of young technicians that didn't even sleep last night. So.
Congratulations. Yeah, that's remarkable. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Teresa. Steve Georgie?
just curious if, I know last year we got an opportunity to speak to the governor or listen to the governor. It was kind of late in the process, but I guess there's a couple of questions. One, is there a actual formal presentation of the task force report to a legislative committee and the governor and his staff? But then secondly, you know, we come out with a recommendation of the 120 million over the biennium, and he comes back with 50 million in year one. That to me is alarming because there's no base funding. The bills that were being introduced were for the biennium, so at least you have a continuum of funding. I'm just, you know, again, concerned. You know, is the task force okay with that? I just think it's, you know, it sounds like it, you know, okay, we get a big, if you were to get the 50 million, you have 50 million, but again, that's for 1 year. So then the program, what do we do? So I'm just wondering how or if there's a concern or a consensus that's concerning. And we need more consistent levels of funding. So.
Thank you, Steve. I know Paul has his hand up, and Paul has some experience over the last few years, so maybe you can share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised at the 50 million, particularly in the first year of the biennium, but I will tell you, you know, going back to, you know, the previous task forces that I've served on, Governor Dayton's budget recommendation never equaled the task force recommendation either. I think we're in this period now, and you know, listening to the press conference and Commissioner Grove, you know, where he talked about, I mean, it's the highest amount that any, you know, the previous administration or this administration has put in a budget recommendation thus far. 50 million is the highest amount, so we have that to go for. But the budget is a framework. And I think now is really when the real work begins with the legislature. We know there's bills out there for 120 million, bipartisan support, Senator Bach, Representative Eklund. I think this is time to turn our attention to the legislature with the House and Senate and their budgets expected to come out, both their caucuses budgets in the next couple of weeks. We've got to be in at least one of those to have a fighting chance for that full 120 million. So I think it's going to be necessary to, you know, are there going to be future hearings on just broadband where the report, or maybe we need to proactively go over the report in one of these committees and present those findings? I think that would be the opportunity to really reinforce that $120 million request with the legislature. And, you know, Representative Pulowski had a hearing on that bill. I know Angie and Diane testified in that, but, you know, maybe trying to get a sense of where does that bill go from here, or where do broadband hearings go from here, so that either Ted Hughes, the chair, or Diane and Angie can get in front of those committees and re-emphasize. I will also say, from my perspective as a board member of the Minnesota Technology Association, we're finalizing our legislative agenda, and Ted, you're on there as well. You know, we will certainly be capturing the importance of that. The Chamber of Commerce, you know, I think for the first time, really putting broadband right up there with, you know, regulation and tax cuts. It's time to really put some pressure. This is a great opportunity for us. We should not waste this time, and I think now the real work begins.
Yeah. I would agree with you, Paul. The work starts now, because I mean, even if the proposed budget from the governor, it won't mean anything till it goes to the Congress there. So, yeah, we'll have to work with the legislature and to try to get to, like you said, Minnesota High Tech Association, or MinTech. We're gonna support, you know, sort of the recommendation from the task force. We're doing a presentation to the Blue Ribbon Council, which is another task force focused on technology in Minnesota. I think their also inclination, once they hear from us, is kind of our recommendations to say, yep, what they said, hopefully, and that's what we're going to push for. And then, yes, it's getting in front of as many committees as possible, getting whatever hearings are there, and even pushing for further, kind of going with our recommendation of the 120 million over the next 2 years. And I think it'll be important to highlight a lot of the comments we made into the document as far as why this is important. And COVID was is an unfortunate situation, but what it did was highlight the importance of broadband and what it means beyond just the nice to haves that maybe folks in the past had thought that's what broadband was. So yeah, that work, to Paul's point, it begins now, and this is where we have to hammer hard. So and to your point, Steve, is it concerning? Yes, but at the same time, it's usually hasn't gotten this level of attention, and hasn't gotten this level of at least even proposal at this stage. So that is promising even from the governor's side. And overall budget there's lots of things. There'll be lots of puts and takes, so we'll have to see where that goes.
Hi, this is John Kelly from the governor's office. I just want to weigh in a little bit here. $50 million one time in a tight fiscal environment, we felt like was a pretty solid investment in broadband in the governor's budget. And like folks, I don't have any disagreement with what folks are saying in terms of it's a long way to May, and there are obviously there's negotiations happening, but there are a lot of areas of the budget where we made cuts. Painful cuts, and we still tried to come forward with a pretty sizable one-time number. There just isn't money right now to have ongoing base funding. There is, and so we came in with the highest one-time that's been in the governor's budget, and we're working off of the forecast. There's going to be a forecast in February. There's going to be a CARES Act bill potentially coming, from Congress. So we made the line item that's in there for broadband is something that, is a, like folks said, and people understand, and the governor said it on Tuesday, I put this out there, this is our marker, but there's a long way to go. But I don't know necessarily that it should be concerning, or that, taking the task force recommendation of 120 million versus what was in the governor's budget as a slight to the task force, or disregarding what the task force is recommending. I think that $50 million number is recognizing that this is something that we need to keep investing in as a state, but also recognizing the tight fiscal environment that we find ourselves in currently due to COVID-19. So I just want to put that out there, and just kind of speak up a little bit, because we're proud of the budget overall, and I'm excited about that. And that's $50 million in the border broadband program. Well, there's another 408 coming in the RDOF program. I think there would be more cause for concern if it was, it's not like we saw the 408 and said, well, we can just have zero. We came in at 50, and in a tight budget. So I just want to put that out there, and I understand the need far exceeds the amount and everything, and this is an important priority for Greater Minnesota and everything, but we see that, and our budget reflects that. So I just wanted to weigh in here.
Yeah. No, thank you, John. I appreciate that comment, and also what's not lost is that the one time is actually a favorable thing versus being over the 2 years, because this actually accelerates some of the infrastructure deployment, right? Because you could be all awarded quickly, and that speeds it up. So that does speak to the urgency that was put on it, and the weight that was put on it. So I appreciate that comment. Brian?
Just the feedback that I'm hearing, just to kind of highlight what you guys are talking about here, is that there's a lot of confusion about how many federal dollars are going to come into the state. So I think that also, just from what, again, we're hearing from legislators, is maybe as a committee, if we can help identify some of those things that we talked about earlier on RDOF, and are we going to be able to truly access those dollars, that will help us, I think, for next year's report to identify that going forward. So I know that you hear billions coming out of the feds for broadband. How is that going to impact us? I think that has also got people looking maybe not that far down the road, which maybe the committee can then help identify. So thank you.
Brian, I think that's a great point, and I think that Angie and Diane and the team at DEED are keeping a really close eye, not only on the immediate term RDOF influx that's coming, the 408 million, but also, we are keeping a close eye on what's coming down the road. I mean, potentially, if there is the level of funding that's being talked about in terms of states that, Minnesota could get a sizable portion that would go well beyond both closing the gap and fixing some of the issues that are in the tails in 24, 25 and beyond. So I think that, and I talked to Senator Bach yesterday, just doing my due diligence and calling through folks around the budget. And, like you said, he's carrying that broadband bill. He, expressed how important it is. I talked to Representative Eklund about the broadband bill. I think there's, we have it in our budget. They have, it's a 4-way negotiation. It's a long way to May, and there's a lot of stuff coming down the pike, and we're in a new ballgame here in terms of a new administration, and the Biden administration has signaled that they want to invest in infrastructure. So, and this is a huge portion of it. So I do want to say that as we know more, as we get more information, as there are more developments out of Washington, I think the future broadband task force meetings or the distro list, we will, point well taken, Brian, we'll try to get that info out to you all, especially if it happens, in between, meetings and stuff like that. So I think there's going to be a lot happening here in the early spring, and we'll just kind of keep the information flowing. But point well taken. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Brian. Other comments from the task force members? Okay, if not, any other business from anyone else that's on this call, even if you're not on the task force, this would be the time to state that. Just raise a hand in Teams and I will call on you. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or anybody coming off mute. So with that, I know we're ending a little bit early, but I think we got the majority of what we wanted to accomplish today. I want to thank everybody for your attendance, for your input. I think this kind of puts us in a good spot to really roll up our sleeves and get to work here in 2021. For the next meetings, we'll work on getting some speakers lined up based on the input we heard. We'll work on these sort of the structure of the subcommittees and what they are, and then we'll let folks kind of vote on that and see how, where you want to be, at least for this year, and we'll go from there. And I think we got some interesting topics, and we'll keep you posted on also this last discussion we just had on any hearings and discussions that happen with the legislature, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that a couple more times before all that is finalized. So with that, thank you for all the input. Thank you for your time, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.